Hello, everyone. We're gathered here today as part of the Ask the Expert session. My name is Nils Christensen. I'm part of the OKDo team here at RS Group, responsible for the product range of single board computers and AIoT equipment. So we're here with Kerry, the founder of GenAI Nerds. Kerry, hello.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, good. How are you?
Everything's good. Just got back
Yeah.
from vacation, so trying to get back online.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So before we kick off and sort of get into the details, tell us a little bit about the Gen AI Nerds. What's that all about for those who haven't already
Yeah,
got on the
um,
bandwagon?
so a little bit about my background. My brother and I have been hacking on computers and doing stuff since realistically we were kids, but like as adult careers, we've been building product companies for about 22 years. I was just looking at the calendar. So like self-taught coders hack on hardware. My brother blew up a Commodore 64 when we were like in elementary school, trying to make a flight simulator. So like kind of those weird type of guys. And then in the past like maybe decade dabbled with AI, and then the past 2 years it's just been almost exclusively generative AI, which is cool. So we've done a lot of work with NVIDIA, same people you and I know, and they sort of asked what can make this more acceptable to a broader set of technocrats, like because it's deep stuff. I mean, crazy deep, scientist level stuff to even dabble with. If you go back maybe a year, it's gotten a little bit easier. So the Gen AI nerds was started as a campaign with them to say, all right, let's educate and kind of simplify and create an agenda for how to make it simpler. How can we push price points down? How can we expand how easy it is to do? And then so we did some videos where we interviewed like their kind of luminaries, and it was a series that started like that, and then we just started doing some educational content on YouTube, and it went viral for, I guess, business. It was 580,000 subscribers, and I think it was in February, so like in 6 months. So it was genuinely surprising. But now we're like, cool, let's use that audience to educate and do open projects, and we've launched a few, and now we're partnered with DesignSpark, which is great. We want to just keep doing that story. So.
That's cool. That's cool. So you said 500,000 people. I mean, what's the reception you're getting? When you're interacting with this large group of people. I mean, how would they feel about Gen AI and what you're doing?
I think the reason it had so many views and eyeballs and click through rate and all that good stuff is because I think generative AI over the past year has been sort of the newspapers saying it's going to take your job and robots are going to infiltrate your life, to how do I use Photoshop to like take my boyfriend out of the background of this picture. So like there hasn't a lot of content in between. So I think you'd have to say it's the appetite for it is just vast, like
Yeah.
wanting to learn about it. And so I think we speak to people who are in, like they've been in since they've been tracking sort of last generation AI for a while. So I think the appetite is big, and I think people are genuinely interested and selfishly like, is this something I should be doing? And I'm kind of here to say, look, you don't have to be the Stanford grad to have a career in generative AI. It's sort of thrust upon us in every facet, including your phone to every web app you'll ever use from here on out. So it's high time that we all got, educated enough as practitioners or users of it, because once you do, I think it elevates your game, whatever that is, whether you
Yeah.
design PCB boards or do firmware or sophisticated, complex software.
Yeah, I think you're leading us on to the topic, that we're sort of here to talk about today, and that is how, generative AI is relevant for your career as an
Right.
engineer, and are they going to take our jobs, right? Or what is it going to do, right? So there's obviously a lot of different topics around Gen AI, but I think that's what we want to talk about today and cover. So what do you feel the adoption within the engineering community for not for the fun stuff that we play around with, but actually
Yeah.
in the office, in the professional environment. What are people sort of sharing with you, and what are
I think if I were to rank order it from most logically applicable, like, okay, that would make sense and is actually happening. So a lot of it is born from productivity gains and like optimistically, because there's downsides to all this stuff as well. Optimistically, do we want humans, our colleagues, doing knucklehead stuff, filling out form like so business process like everyone that's in that game is thinking, how do we automate where we can automate? Like, so I think documents, back end workflows are all thinking about this. Customer support things are also pretty obvious. Like, in some senses, we've all been trained to go to an airport and prefer working with the kiosk than talking to someone. Like, there's a little bit of that benefit that's rolling through. So I think there's no one in corporate America who isn't asking themselves like what's the role. I think once you get into like a COO hat, CIO hat, you're thinking these processes are expensive or could be made better, or you're in charge of interacting with consumers, either like pull through marketing or supporting them. And I think there's wonderful opportunities and all that stuff. When it comes to like edge devices and everything, I think any physical space is very intriguing. Anything from kind of fairly obvious things we want to do with cameras to physical kiosks and other workflows. I think the people are expensive, and consumers have like a desire to like interact and get through these flows super fast. So I think those are the things I'm seeing that are wins.
Yeah, but what about the engineering team and the engineering community, right? I think I've had 25 years in the industry, and this not invented here, right? And now we're
Yeah.
asking, code computer power to generate things, right? It won't be invented here, right? Whether that's your test sequence, or whether that's actually code writing, or somebody doing code review, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
What are, I guess, there's some kind of protectionism against, I'll use GenAI for fun, but I won't bring it with me into the office.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'll talk about the optimistic upside and what I see first, and then we can talk about is that good? But I think the excitement is overriding the oh wait, I still enjoy my main function and owning every bit of code. Like we've all been there; it's all very enjoyable, and I think Gen AI is going to be most useful in the hands of people that have a background in traditional coding. I think there'll be less long-term need to get a degree in Python because the expert deep stuff, it's pretty good. Like the systems interconnection and understanding how they all put together towards an end game, it's bad. So I think engineers, I think the opportunities are to make you as an individual way more productive. And as much as you'd like to like write that library and do that, there's just going to be less of that. There's less need to. So if you're the type that just wants to get stuff done, like I want to put together these things or put an MVP together or a demo, I mean, it's never been easier. And then I think it's taking every junior developer and giving them unbelievable ability to have output. I think we've all used Stack Overflow. You copy a snippet, you do all these sorts of things. But I think it'll get integrated into your coding environment in a way where it's sort of like auto completing functions and little micro things. So I would push against the idea of it's not created here in the same way that like you didn't make Python, right? Or you didn't make NumPy, you didn't make Python or TensorFlow, right? You didn't make these things, but they're making you make other things better and expand like everything. So I think it's a little bit of a mental shift where you're using it. But if you're kind of at the bottom or you're at the top, like an engineering manager type, you're definitely going to be like using it. And even if you hate it, CIO, CTO is definitely going to be pushing it downwards. And so I'm kind of here to say, look, lean into it a little bit and you'll find, besides it being fun, like what you can get done in the minutia bit, unit test writing, like working with QA, like all of the stuff that's not fun coding is can be reduced with these tools.
Yeah. Yeah. So then when you said, a junior engineer can actually get quickly a lot more productivity maybe than they've had in the past coming into a new environment. What's the opportunity for those more seasoned engineers, right? How do they get on the Gen AI bandwagon from your perspective? What would you give as guidance?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Let's talk a few more reasons why, and then maybe a few on how. So I think there's a lot of talk about code completion, or just coding experts and these things that you're going to completely remove engineers. I think we're pretty far from that. From like my experience at it, I've both been wowed. I showed you that my son plays volleyball, and I was telling him to keep his shoulders over his knees when he passes. He doesn't believe it, so I took my Ray-Ban Meta glasses. So I'm passing with them. So I captured live video, and then I asked Perplexity AI, hey, OpenCV, NumPy, go extract all the features and the locations, and then calculate like where the shoulders were over the knees. And it did all this like trigonometry and all this like vector math. And I said, okay, so draw a line between this and that, and like just give it a score. So in like what would have took me a month, maybe I did in 3 hours. But I'm good at Python and I know how OpenCV. So when I'm looking at it, I'm saying that's wrong, but you're close,
Yeah,
And so I was taking snippets and putting it together. So I talk a lot about being a systems thinker because if you're okay, it would took me forever to do dot product math. I haven't done it forever. I was never good at it to begin with. So the idea that you have like this kind of Yoda level expert to help you like just write that function, sweet. Can you return it as a float? Awesome. And plunk that in and put it together towards my goal. Like that's what I'm thinking of, like how to get to that end game. So I think as senior engineers in teams, you're kind of doing less coding these days and kind of babysitting the juniors, and kind of you're floating in between that managerial role. So you're doing a lot of infrastructure stuff, right? Go debug
yeah,
the messaging queue. Like you're doing all this like sort of stuff that was far from what you maybe even enjoyed to start. So why not look at these tools as something that elevates the game of yourself and the rest of your team?
yeah. No, yeah, I got the benefit of seeing your volleyball. It was quite impressive how quickly you can get something that is actually, from me at least, groundbreaking in analyzing sports, right? It's you know all these tools that are available to us, and it's just about learning to use them. You don't need to know how they operate within, right? And I think that's
I would argue that like if unless you're just some like assembly level nerd, you use Stack Overflow. So it's a little bit hypocritical to be like generative AI is just wildly different. I mean, just imagine anyone who's ever posted about the weird bug you've gone through, or NVIDIA GPU drivers, or whatever it is, that's sitting there. And then you're asking it to like summarize and then generate snippets or explain very complicated subjects in an engineering way. Like to not take advantage of that is just over the next 10 years going to make you the old curmudgeon, or I don't know. Like if we're
yeah,
talking about waves of engineers, it's sort of not going anywhere for sure. So you're kind of either lean in or be the guy in the corner that's like writing libraries for whatever amount of time that's a job. So I think it's sort of like you can elevate and differentiate your career, or sort of put some brakes on it.
mm,
There's no world where the people in the middle and the top aren't asking, do we need that? Can we use this? And that'll be annoying for sure. No one wants to like have a system or anything, but I look at it in sports terms. If you're a senior engineer, you're sort of the in basketball terms, you're the point guard, but you're trying to make things flow, and you're being asked about architectures and like workflows and software development life cycles and stuff. And I think from ticketing to unit tests to QA to code snippet generation, it's all made significantly easier.
mm. We talk a lot about the coder or the programs that run right within Gen AI, but I think the hardware engineers, the mechanical engineers, they all have tools available to them, to use Gen AI as well, right?
Yeah.
Do you so I guess any engineer, depending on, independent of discipline, should really embrace the power of Gen AI. Is
I mean, I'm not here to say you should. I guess I would say it's not transient. It's going to be here forever. There's no tool you use where there's not a scrum board where they're like, how do we add it? Third, it's not all about ChatGPT. Like you and I love edge compute, edge generative AI, speech to text, text to speech. Like it's not always ChatGPT sentence generation, right? It's like I've used these engines to convert full PDFs into JSON structures. So like entire digesting pipelines and stuff just boop, and it's like way less efficient than if someone wrote it linearly, but it like learns and picks up different input formats. So like you're kind of trading off, some of these things, but that's part of the journey. We've had lots of new technologies, unstructured databases versus SQL. Everyone's like, wait, unstructured, how will that work? Like we learn to use these new things, and then you kind of get the payoff, hopefully. So I think PCB designers I saw the other day, where you can like use more of a WYSIWYG thing, and it does the auto traces, all the copper, and I
Yeah,
mean, I'm sure people like to do that. I've never done it, but
yeah,
if you're a consultant contractor that does that, you just had more profitable hours that you're billing. So I
yeah.
think
I
there's
mean, there's still, you still need to build the system, right? But doing the actual just connecting things you have on a schematic, right? And then with your expertise and your experience, right, then you can judge whether this is a good job or you have to start from scratch, or you just, to your point, you fine tune it a bit, in your
I
volleyball
think
example.
you still need to know how systems thinking is the best way I know how to talk about it, because as engineers, like sometimes we're black boxing things, sometimes we're reaching into the box and wondering why the gears don't work. So I think sometimes you want to say it needs to say three, right? And so I don't care how it works, and that's fine. When I've used generative AI for like coding and engineering tasks, I always have the part of my head that's like, you want to catch it when it does it wrong. I saw this funny meme where it was like me looking at my own code trying to debug it, and you're all tired. It's me trying to debug someone else's code. You're like, wait,
Yeah,
wait, 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 that guy screw up. So I think that's good. Like you can't get a lot out of these things without having the principles of how it all works underneath. Like you can't have never programmed linear, stuff and new languages and use any of this to great effect. So your job isn't going anywhere. But I think the two kind of quotes that I think are floating around the internet is that you're not going to lose your job to generative AI itself. You'll just lose your job to the people that use generative AI better than you. Like over time, not tomorrow, but like at scale, economics wise,
yeah,
yeah, there'll be less need for every category. And so the best thing you could be is someone who's a systems thinker who isn't just pigeonholed as like a Python programmer. So maybe they need 9 instead of 10, right? So that puts pressure on you. But be the person that knows how to integrate all these things and add value and troubleshoot. And the quicker you can learn and differentiate, the more your bosses say, "Good job, Nils." Like,
yeah,
didn't know that. Like,
yeah,
A for effort and all that.
yeah. Okay. So then, if we think about it from the employee perspective, then looking for, candidates, sifting through CVs, etc. I mean, I was thinking about, how quickly will the educational system pick up on, training the new engineers coming into the market. And
Yeah.
um, we spoke about how the senior engineers, with years of experience, can leverage AI, but how do they actually make this come through, in their CVs, etc.
Ooh, not super qualified on that, but I think it comes back to any marketing principle, which is how do you stand out? So
Hmm.
I don't think anyone, like, let's just take two paths, like the best Python engineer you've ever seen, just banging out, you know, lots of middleware and sort of all. I mean, how many bullet points of the classic acronyms can you put out there, right? Like,
Yeah,
that gets kind of boring. But if you talk about implementing, like, that not only did I do all these things, but I improved the software development lifecycle. We implemented these tools. I recommended these workflows. I was in charge of this committee that analyzed all new tools in general or what. So you want, I mean, it depends what job you're going for, but assuming you want more and more money, you get more and more money by being useful outside of just the one skill they're asking. Maybe it's senior engineer, but that embodies lots and lots of stuff. In a small team, that could be no coding at all.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It just kind of, it kind of depends. But my recommendation would be everyone is interested in someone who's a lifelong learner. And if the last thing you picked up was, there's nothing new since Python, it's just all implementation and use and none of like the new generation tools or whatever, it might actually just exclude you.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all put up stuff on CVs that are like, overhanging how much you actually did or how much credit you deserve, but go out there and learn these tools and use it. So at least they're not saying, this older guy, this older lady, there's has not refreshed their thinking and their skills in the past 10 years. You don't want to be that person.
No. But it all comes with embracing, what they could do, right? So once you embrace it, you start learning about it, then you're on that journey, right? So don't be afraid, about learning things. I guess it's
I mean, all the engineers I've met in my life, no one's afraid to do it. It's more, if you're older, you're like kind of roll of the eyes and like, when does the marketing stuff burn off? And I'm on both sides of that, right? You know me, I've done a fair share of pitching stuff and trying stuff, and there's that part of me. The engineering side is like, I like the way I do stuff. Like I have my tools and I still use Eclipse and I'll use VS Code for this and that. So I think everyone's got that friction. But I think if there's one kind of wall to traverse, it's get out of the mindset that ChatGPT with asking it to generate long sentences, which is the opposite of most coding, like bring me back a float, bring me back a structure. Try to use ChatGPT and put it in a mode where you're saying, and bring that back as JSON. I mean, just one example, I was working with a customer, brought in a PDF with no, I know this, I can describe it this way. In proving that it could work, I took my mobile bill, my personal cellular mobile bill, put it in there and said, what is this? And who do you need to pay, or who needs to pay this bill? What are the top 3 line items? And then did any of the line items match any regulations in California? Just shot in the dark. Rips right through it. And it's like, banging out all this text, pulled out my bill, my son's costs, all that sort of stuff. I was like, so then I sent it another bill and I said, okay, juxtapose the line items. Are there any cost differences? And it said, yes, this is, $4 more this month. I said, okay, now convert that to JSON. I want a structure that lists line items and taxes as separate arrays within the, I'm not verbally, but putting it in the prompt. And then I want a final array that juxtaposes the cost line items and any delta. Oh, by the way, put a Boolean at the top that says there was any delta at all. So, if I'm using this data, and it just spits out JSON. So now I just like prototype something that would have been just to prove to your boss that it was possible, might be a month. But now this thing is just doing it and it's talking JSON. So then what we're seeing now and what's coming down the pipe are these agents. I don't know if you've heard of it, or agentification, which seems like a weird English word, where they're like an engineer, you're saying like, you are the document to JSON digester. I'm not also going to tell you to do all this other stuff. So you're kind of a node in a pipeline that eats this and spits out JSON. And when you're done, you send a message to this other running generative AI lifecycle thing. And so when you hear agents, just think more component-sized functions in generative AI passing JSON messages back and forth when they're done.
Yeah.
Otherwise known as like every backend system you've ever seen. But they're sort of living, so the weirdos out there are like trying to get them to talk back and forth, like, to think through problems, and that's fine. But the real useful stuff is to like use generative AI for some function and have its output be JSON and like push it into a message queue saying, okay, done. And then like other ones are picking it up and enriching pipelines. So that's a real low hanging fruit too. If you have kind of transformative document stuff, or certainly images, video, all these things those are very interesting use cases.
So Kerry, I mean, it's just so many things to pick on, but I mean, for those people said, hey, I need to know more about AI. I'm going to listen to one of the experts yourself, right? And you're talking about all this JSON stuff. Where, if this doesn't resonate to them, so, okay, I don't know what he's talking about. Where would you direct them to go and sort of pick this up? Because if they search AI, they're going to drown, right? So
Uh,
where would you direct somebody who listens to this and says, yeah, I'm ready to learn about what Kerry's talking about?
oh, sorry, my camera's jumping around. YouTube is the place to go. I think you have to subdomain it. I mean, like you said, AI would be useless. Generative AI is almost useless. If you're on YouTube and look for generative AI for engineers or GenAI code assistants, that puts you in the right realm.
Okay.
If you need to be convinced, that there's not a lot of content for that. Like we're at this like part of the hype cycle where they just assume you're interested because it's magic, right? So I think that NVIDIA's got some pretty good content if you're sort of in and want to get better. Our channel, Generative AI Nerds, is a little bit in that pocket, where we're kind of carrying you forward. So I'd say if you're not convinced, then like let's keep talking about that because we're going to start doing more and more content about that. I hate waving the banner to say you should because there's so many. It's already naturally growing. It's not
Yeah.
a huge bastion of people who are like holding out. I think it's more like, okay, so how do I start that journey? I think YouTube's your friend as always, and I think that start figuring out like these plugins for VS Code or whatever your environment is. There's plenty of that stuff to put you on a journey, and then just like anything, you have to ask yourself is how do I apply this?
Yeah.
Even if you're not that, it's being thrust into everywhere and anything. So I think by the next time you update VS Code, I'm sure you'll just auto complete typing. It'll just like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I know what you're doing. Will you stop, please? Just let me complete this thing for you. So I think that's the answer there.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. We spoke a lot about the why. Any other sort of sharing on the how? I mean, what do you see how this would evolve, right, over the years? I mean, we never touched on the educational system, but we can maybe do that
Yeah, I
in
think
another.
we're really excited about that. I've got a buddy who's they do 10,000 hours of STEM a week
Wow.
for Los Angeles Unified. And so he was talking about us about robotics, and I've been talking about robotics, and I think generative AI would be great from that perspective. He wants to start with our community what we're calling, and this is like early days, but the idea of like the Gen AI thinker. So like someone who thinks in generative AI is more of a systems thinker, and we're kind of espouting two principles. You have to be a systems thinker, which I'll explain in a second, and then you have to be good at communications because it turns out great prompt writers are just very clear communicators. If you ever worked with a manager who's like this, you're like, thanks. I am not confused at all. There's nothing murky. And then when you're interacting with Gen AI, that's very helpful. So if you're really wishy-washy and you complain you get something back poorly, like that's the same thing if you're working with an employee, like that's the same thing. So clear communication is pretty obvious. The systems thinking on the educational bit, and I think I posted this on the DesignSpark about like what kids will need in the future, and it posits that look, if you take two paths, like Python expert Stanford grad or a girl who could never afford that or maybe never qualify or whatever, over the next like 5 years or so, if this one becomes an expert in systems thinking, which is sort of, like I said, describe it as taking the output of one component, bringing in the input of another, and bringing components and diagnosing all the inputs and outputs and rules and laws that embody that system till it gets what she wants. Like that's what I think. I think systems thinker. You take that girl and then you teach her all these techniques and that mentality and to walk the earth like everything's a system. Like the reason you got grounded, that's a system with your parents, like everything. You're like, wait, what happened? Why? And you're getting to ground truth and like diagnosing the world that way. And it's a wonderful way to sort of understand life, I guess, if I'm not being too weird about it. But anyway, so if you take that skill, that's going to abstract them from being pigeonholed as I don't know, a project manager or a QA manager. I don't know if that job will exist. Who knows, right? But I think anyone that uses these tools to great effect and can like look at a problem and solve it through components and everything is going to be differentiated and have utility in tomorrow's work. So, so it's not just for entrepreneurs, and like, don't even get me started on that. Like, what the CEO of NVIDIA talked about, we're not far from a one-person company creating a billion dollar company, obviously with contractors and all that stuff. But the point is, there's no domain of knowledge that you can't pretty quickly catch up on. So I think you have the entrepreneurs, which that part's kind of obvious, but I think any domain of knowledge you want to be in, just think that like anyone else can be equally capable with this thing sitting on its shoulders. So like, how are you going to get better? And I think it's systems thinking and clear communications.
Yeah, I think, with these incredibly complex machines, right, if I call them that, if you're not clear in what you're asking it to do, how are you ever going to, have a good outcome, right? So yeah. I think that's
I think it does feel loose, because you could. I think what's uncomfortable about using it is by design, not so much on like if you tell it to give you JSON, that part's pretty fine. But every other use, it will give you a different answer if you did it 100 times. So. I think there's also so much effort on putting guardrails, and we didn't talk about RAG, but I mean, just think about the generalized model like GPT and all the stuff you're seeing as like a level of human and how much that human has read, right? GPT-4, GPT-5, right? All that sort of stuff. But people are saying that's fine. Like, that's not what's interesting to me. So they use RAG to like take a private set of data or a database, something with like a smaller domain than, I don't know, the world. And then when you're asking questions, there's a different type of machine learning that I just call it vector search for now. And it pulls out that context and then feeds it to that brain and says, answer this question, but only with this subset of data. And if you don't know, tell me you don't know. So that gets very interesting because I think we're all dissatisfied as an engineer about like, you just gave me like a little bit of a different answer. It's a little bit loose based on how I ask. But where almost exclusively when I walk into, people want to do these RAG applications where it's a private set of data and you're kind of searching and sub-selecting data from that and then feeding it to almost like a commodity. Like, okay, so imagine a prompt that was 6 pages long. You can think of it like that, where you're pulling out those 6 pages and then just saying, this is kind of all you know. Then you have the backdrop of all your base knowledge, but just answer me in that space. And I think that kind of helps put perspective on how that becomes useful from customer support to, and really any of these use cases.
Yeah, but yeah, so I think that's where the chat GPT, call it the world, gets relevant to, companies and individuals that, I mean, you did your bill analogy earlier, right? Or your experiment there. You don't want all the bills in the world. You just want the knowledge of how to interpret a bill, but you want the answers to come out of the data set that you want it to be relevant to. Right?
So. In some senses, I feel like the back-end GPT thing is now the commodity. Like, you can download it for free. It is open source. Like, you're one Docker download away from having like a baby version of the 50 million computers that OpenAI has, right? That's a compute issue. But the brain is pretty similar. But then unless you're doing like the initial wave of what people were doing, like generating summaries, and I'm taking kind of marketing content out of there because it's still very good at like generating prose and kind of verbiage and images and all that stuff. I take all that out of this whole conversation. But when you start giving it a smaller domain and saying stay within these boundaries and then answer me these questions, you can see why it's very good. Um, so I don't think linear programming is going anywhere, and I think the traditional architectures are still going to be there. I think like place in place, they'll say like we were thinking about rewriting the whole kind of data transformation pipeline. Should we be doing it this way? Or, and I think there's other low hanging fruit that will be that kind of outsource. Like, do we need to be doing our own search function for our content? Like, or should we outsource it to Amazon, whatever? I'm sure Amazon's got something, Azure's got something. So I think there'll be a lot of those conversations. But I mean, maybe what it should be is, hey, boss, we should keep this in house. Like, let us build our own institutional knowledge of these generative AI tools. So outside of the coding assistance, like if we're building it into the architectures, do we want to pay that fee? Do we want to do that? We can start with it to prototype, but it's really not that hard to integrate these engines. And in fact, in our community, we launched this new open project called Gappy that actually NVIDIA's Jetson AI lab picked up. It was the first non-NVIDIA made project that they picked up. And the whole idea was to like, how can we integrate these things privately in my own servers on my own laptop or whatever, and be able to interact with it within the rest of the systems and plumbing of an architecture. So,
but that gap is also, I mean, you mentioned the edge earlier, right? But that's all contained on your local machine, right? You go
it's contained however you like it. So whether that's on an edge device, and or on a private server, or publicly hosted. But I think people, well, it was shocking to me that you could do any version of ChatGPT not at ChatGPT, because it kind of implies that there's, the server compute is just dramatically different. But the way I think of it is that it's like horizontally distributed at OpenAI in a crazy way. And how they trained their model, I heard this rumor that it cost them like $10 million a try. So every build, just to even try to build, it's multiple weeks and $10 million in cost to try. So I mean, that's the complexity level of that model. But Meta released, Llama and some of these open source things that get you, I'll call it 75 or 80% of what in spirit those things are capable of, and you can run it on your laptop. Like, check out the Ollama project, OLLAMA.
Yep.
And once you download that, you can fire a prompt and just pick a model, and it'll just download it and do it. So I think that those are easy ways to get started, if you're wondering how to make it run without paying a fee to OpenAI.
Okay, cool. So we've covered a lot of ground. We talked about all kinds of things, but
as usual, no.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, any last words of wisdom, when it comes to the topic of your career? I think we've given a lot of people a lot of things to think about, me included. So
let's see. I guess if I were to summarize, I'd say it's not going anywhere. This is not a fad. I personally am blown away. God, out of the 22 years I've been doing technology, I think we've all seen these little step changes. More compute, more GPU, more all this stuff. Then AI, you're like, oh, interesting, but I don't know how to really personally use it. I don't make a YouTube recommendation engine. So if you were lucky enough that an AI project happened at work, like that was more the rarity. But I think generative AI is a step change in like even how we're thinking about systems are built. And so I would say, if you had to predict, there's no one in your business, if you're kind of in a technical, your job is technical in nature. There's no one around you that isn't thinking, how is this going to get used? How can we use it? And we're kind of in that mode now where those conversations are happening. Should we bring it into our next version or whatever? And I would encourage anyone to do their own exploration about how they can be better, how they could be using it just to even solve their own little problems or snippets or design patterns or whatever. I mean, it's an infinitely wise, maybe wise is the wrong word, but infinitely useful tool to be sitting there. Like, I have a browser in my other monitor. It's just boop. Like, my history when I look through it is pretty funny, because it's everything from like how do I cook a tri-tip in an oven to like, you know, uh, just I have this weird code snippet issue, and it helps me with it. So, I mean, it's exploring it, and if you're open minded to think like, how can this thing be made easier, or we spend 25% of every huddle with our programmers with the same recurring problem, like using these tools to solve it, I think is low hanging fruit. And if it does map all to a CV, then start working backwards from that, right?
Yeah.
I was the guy that implemented these changes using these tools, and you're bound to be differentiated because they'd say, oh, this person's obviously thinking about how to make the whole team better. So
Yeah. Thanks, Kerry. It's been great talking as always. And
cheers, thank you.
for you that stuck with us until the end, any questions, etc., I think there's going to be a comment field there somewhere that we'll keep an eye on. So thank you, and
Great.
have a great day, everyone.
Okay, thanks, Niels.